My vote tonight is going to be no. And my vote to remain a no isn't based on any evidence. It's not based on any facts. It's only based on my gut feeling and my own intuition, and that's all I need to base my vote on the elections right there.
That was Couy Griffin, the election commissioner in Otero County, New Mexico, and founder of Cowboys for Trump. On June 7th, Griffin refused to certify the county's 2022 primary election results, not because of any irregularities in the voting or reports of voter fraud, but because he had a gut feeling that fueled his belief and outweighed any need for evidence. Griffin's belief was stoked by conspiracy theories about the Dominion voting machines used in the election, theories first peddled by Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani after Trump lost the presidential election in 2020.
The Otero County Election Commission voted 2-1 to certify the results, only after the state Supreme Court ordered them to. Griffin phoned in the single no vote from Washington, D.C., where he was being sentenced for his part in the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol.
I'm Tracy Fessenden.
And I'm John Carlson.
And this is Recovering Truth, a podcast from Arizona State University's Center for the Study of Religion and Conflict. Today we're joined by Donovan Schaefer and Charles McCrary to discuss the relationships among knowledge, feeling, and belief. Donovan Schaefer is Assistant Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. He is the author of Wild Experiment, Feeling, Science, and Secularism After Darwin. Charles McCrary is also a religious studies scholar and a postdoctoral fellow in the Center for the Study of Religion and Conflict here at ASU. His new book is called Sincerely Held, American Secularism and Its Believers. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
So let's begin with a really basic kind of question. That quote from Griffin suggests there's a kind of a choice about different ways of knowing things are true or not. On the one hand, there are facts, there's evidence, rationality. We give reasons for things. These are modes of inquiry that we associate with science, with law, with the kind of secular domain of our world. And then, on the other hand, there's feeling, instinct, belief, deeply held belief, which are kind of private views, right? And incidentally, they're also associated with religion and faith oftentimes. So are these the main ways that we have for knowing things, determining whether something is true in a society? Donovan?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're asking the question in the right way, because it's built into the framing of how he answers the question, that he presupposes that you either have logic-based, evidence-based reasons for believing what you believe, or you have emotion-based, gut-based reasons for believing what you believe. And part of the problem that I think we have in our liberal public discourse is that we accept this as a binary. We assume that you are either following a kind of rational course of belief selection, or you're following a fundamentally irrational course of belief selection. I'm guided by my gut in this particular instance. That's not something that people would typically say, but in any instance, it's reflecting exactly this presupposition that we have, that there's a feeling track and a thinking track. And part of what I argue in my work is that causes a lot of political problems for us. We've mistaken what the nature of belief formation actually is by assuming that there are these two separate tracks, and that's led us to a misunderstanding of why we believe what we believe and why we affirm what we affirm in the public sphere.
So in my work on sincerely held religious belief, one of the things in politics and culture and in law that makes a religious belief different from other beliefs, right, is that it's not subject to the same standards of evidence, right? If you say, I believe in God, or I believe that I need to pray in this setting, or something like that, right? That's not the same type of claim as saying, I believe the election was fraudulent, right? So the standards of evidence are different. And yet there's all kinds of gray area in between these types of claims, as the invocation of gut feeling indicates. And I mean, as Donovan's work shows, feeling is in many ways the seat of cognition. There's not a split between them, but we feel first and then we think.
Let's talk a bit about conspiracy theories, since, of course, there have been so many swirling around COVID, vaccination, their relationship to QAnon, ideas about the deep state, secret cabals, the return of JFK Jr., and the like. Donovan, in your book, Wild Experiment, you argue that conspiracy thinking stems from a sort of distorted version of scientific feeling. So tell us more.
Yeah, so I see conspiracy theory and science itself as venues within which we can explore this interrelationship between thinking and feeling. We think our way through a situation by feeling our way through a situation. We feel our way through a situation by thinking about it. So, the way that I understand this is that science, again, speaking in a kind of idealized sense, this is not necessarily what any one scientific project would look like, but I think when science is working well, you've got a kind of check and balance system. You've got scientists who are excited by the work that they're doing. They feel the sense of contact. They feel the sense of exhilaration as they make discoveries. But they're also cautious about those discoveries because it can be misleading, it can be seductive, it can pull you off course if you start seeing connections and everything. So there's this push-pull. Conspiracy theory, I argue, doesn't have this. Conspiracy theory gets very excited about connections, but then doesn't apply pressure to it. And what you see with conspiracy theory is this proliferation of connections, where everything fits together with everything else. All of the different pieces have a particular role to play. I published a piece about conspiracy theory a few weeks ago, and got a lot of hate mail in response to this conspiracy theory article. And one of the things that fascinated me about it was that the people who were writing to me made me part of a conspiracy. Like, I wasn't just a person who happened to have a critical take on conspiracy theory. I was a perfectly fitted cog in the existing conspiracy that fit with everything else. So there's this enthusiasm, there's this joy that comes along with fitting everything together, like in this massive sprawling puzzle. And I came to see both conspiracy theory and science as templates where we can study this intersection of thinking and feeling, but in different configurations.
That's fascinating. I'm just thinking about in relation to some of the examples in your book, what many of us learn in graduate school. My training was in English and religious studies, but I imagine there's something like this going on in most departments. We learn to create those vast coherences, right? I mean, we learn to make everything fit together. That's a good paper or a good book. So this is very, very rich. I want to bring Charlie in. Charlie, your book, Sincerely Held, American Secularism and Its Believers, looks at the role of sincerely held belief in our court system and elsewhere. How does conspiracy thinking or conspiracy feeling relate to sincerely held belief? It seems like plenty of religious beliefs are close to or overlapping with conspiracy beliefs or conspiracy feelings.
Yeah, this is a great question. It's something I thought about quite a bit while writing the book. One of the arguments that I want to make is that the reason that the courts evaluate religious sincerity rather than the truth of a belief is because investigation of theological truth seems like it's not really a secular endeavor, right? It's not up to the secular courts to say this religious belief is true. So instead, what do? You say, okay, do they really believe it? And this is supposed to be, impartial and neutral. But of course, it's a lot easier for people whose beliefs seem believable to be taken seriously. If it's too removed from what's normal or what seems to be true or what is, believable, it receives a lot more scrutiny. It raises an eyebrow for judges. And so I'm interested in where those lines are drawn, right? This came up in Hobby Lobby. Nobody ever questions whether the owners of the Hobby Lobby Corporation's beliefs about medicine are in fact religious beliefs. It's like, obviously it's religious. That's what religious people believe things about. Whereas if you say something about land use or say something racist or something like that, that's not what religion is really about. And so in these weird ways, we've decided what content, we've evaluated sincerity by its content in this kind of backdoor way.
Right. I'm thinking of some of the more extreme cases or public ones where someone says, "Well, I believe that the COVID vaccine is the mark of the beast," and this is attributed in some way as a religious belief. Is that a belief that should be given some kind of special significance and protection because it falls under this religious category that somehow people are claiming?
Right, and as we see, these religious beliefs often look like conspiracy beliefs, and there's no line between them, right? Or at least the line between them is quite fuzzy. But on one hand, I think many people would say, well, if you have a genuine religious belief, that's fine. But if you have a genuine, sincere belief that Bill Gates is putting microchips in them, well, that's not fine. Why? What is it? What kind of functional definition of religion is going on here, and what actual work is it doing on the ground? That's a good question, I think.
Donovan, I was very struck by something you say in your book, and that is that our feelings and our passions are why our intellectual projects succeed when they do succeed, and they're also why they fail when they fail. This brings up something for me about Charlie's work as well. I don't want to make the mistake of associating religious belief with simply with feeling or passion. But Charlie, you suggest at the end of Sincerely Held that our religious beliefs, our sincerely held beliefs and commitments might reinforce our suspicions. They might feed our conspiracy thinking and feeling, but they might also help to restore greater civic trust. That is, they might help our intellectual projects or our political projects of building civic trust to succeed. And I wonder if you could say more about that.
Yes. What I mean by that is that sincerity could actually be a pretty good public ethic because it is inherently social. You can't be sincere by yourself because sincerity is all about representing yourself truthfully and accurately and honestly to other people, right? And so in that part, I'm thinking a little bit actually with what Donovan mentioned earlier with some of the post-critical folks. Rita Felsky has this line in The Limits of Critique where she's thinking with Latour on what it means to be well attached, to be part of a network. And she says, or he says, and she quotes him, emancipation does not mean to be freed from all bonds, but to be well attached, right? You can't be in isolation, and you actually don't want to be in isolation. You want to be with other people. And so for me, I think if we're going to be part of a democratic society, if we're going to participate in public life, this necessarily entails making some of our private selves available to other people, being social and being attached to them. And sincerity is actually a pretty good ethic to guide that. It should be truthful, it should be accurate, you should say the things you actually mean. There is still a need to evaluate the content of what people are saying. But sincerity is good for public discourse. It's good to be sincere, but we should tell the truth to each other. And that's actually a good way to build community rather than reinforcing this kind of atomized individual sincere believer who is the subject of a lot of religious freedom legislation where they're protected from all outside harms. I don't have to participate in society because I have a sincere belief. No, your sincere belief should actually be an invitation into more genuine public dialogue, or at least that's the way it could work.
Charlie, your idea of sincerity as a way of trying to establish or reestablish trust is in some ways very consistent with what we're trying to do in our project, which is to think about how is it that scholars, journalists, citizens can support the kind of recovery of truth, the recovery of trust in our civic sphere where we hold some kind of knowledge in common. Donovan, you write at one point, academics, for our part, can reaffirm a commitment to truth essential to scholarship. Now, what do you mean by that? Aren't scholars already committed to truth?
I think that when you talk to humanities academics, you can actually find a range of levels of commitment to something called truth. I'm really interested in the extent to which some scholars in the humanities, I think, see the humanities as something that does not move forward. They see the humanities as something that doesn't necessarily get better over time, but instead circulates certain existing habits of thinking that don't exactly move forward. a lot of 20th century French and German thought came to see philosophy as a form of meditation, came to see philosophy as something that was designed to be reflective and personally transformative, but was not necessarily designed to move forward. Heidegger is the template of this. Heidegger says that philosophy needs to be categorically differentiated from science, where science is something that is objective and it's about manipulating the world, whereas philosophy is about transforming and renovating the self. So that's a very sharp formulation, and I think very few scholars in the humanities today would affirm that. But I do think that the shadow of that perspective is still something that's very much with us. And I think a lot of humanities scholars have at least some residual allergy to the idea that knowledge is progressive and that the humanities might be more like the sciences than we're comfortable with it being, that we might be coming up with better ideas over time as our conversations advance, or that our ideas might be worse, that we could get into a malaise and we could create a scholarly conversation that's actually worse at understanding the world around us than scholarly conversations that we had 20 or 50 or 100 years ago. Just the very idea that the humanities is something that can be better or worse at understanding the world around us is, I think, something that is quietly more controversial than we necessarily see on the surface. So one of the arguments that I make in the book is that we need to be more affirmative about the value of truth as a norm within the humanities, and that we need to bring these conversations to the surface and recognize that humanities scholars have an incredibly important role to play in understanding the constitution of the public sphere, and that we need to see ourselves as allies of scientists who are very clearly trying to drive towards better modes of understanding, rather than, as I think no small number of humanities scholars see themselves, as in tension with the sciences or as doing something that is at cross purposes or orthogonally related to the sciences. Given the urgency of the threats that are facing us right now, I think that it's an all hands on deck moment where we need to be figuring out how to expand conversations and reach out to people in other disciplines rather than to contract.
That was Donovan Schaefer, author of Wild Experiment, Feeling Science and Secularism After Darwin, and Charles McCrary, author of Sincerely Held, American Secularism and Its Believers. Thanks so much to both.
Thanks so much, Jen and Tracy. This was terrific.
Thank you for having us. This was a good time and a great conversation.
I'm Tracy Fessenden.
And I'm John Carlson. This podcast is part of the Recovering Truth Project at Arizona State University's Center for the Study of Religion and Conflict, in partnership with the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication, and supported by a generous grant from the Henry Luce Foundation.
Our producer is Sarah Ventry. Our team includes Nat Korea, and our music is by Ketsa.
Recovering Truth is a civic responsibility. Thank you for listening and joining us in this effort.